As I sit here considering the story I'm about to tell, I wonder if it even constitutes as even worth telling. I have buried it deep in my mind, as either an hallucination or a work of childhood imagination. But I still can't quite let it go. I've kept this to myself. After all, if even I'm not sure what to believe, who else would believe it? Have you ever thought about a memory in your life with such a sense of intensity that the said memory seems to detach itself from reality? What I mean to suggest is that, without deliberately trying to sound pretentious, there is a point in which the memories we've built for our lives leave our brain and enter into the world around us, maybe just privately, in our diaries, or perhaps we've told it to a close friend or relative. But it's at that point that the memory becomes something apart from reality as we know it. It's a fusion of reality and fiction, a place where the two intersect and overlap. Maybe the memory required an embellishment for the story to be digested by its listeners. The story took on its own form, a form that worked better for the sake of storytelling. That's how you might transition from hearing strange noises in your house one evening to telling your cousin that you've truly saw a ghost lurking in your corridors. I think we're all more than aware of this happening than we care to admit. After all, who would be interested in a story if it wasn't any good? I've often wondered, though, if the opposite might occur. That fiction, in its active repetition, eventually overrides reality to such a degree that the two become one and the same. You are no longer lying, but rather telling something that you've taught yourself to be the truth. Years have passed since the story I'm about to tell, and I hope it's just that. A story. A lie that my brain has concocted to explain what it might not have been able to comprehend. My mother has been a real estate agent for as long as I can remember, and for a good chunk of my childhood was a single mother. While she eventually married when I was 10, prior to that she would often take me to her various real estate events. She had no problem affording a babysitter, but there were times where she had to be on site with little notice to show houses to prospective buyers. And with no faster alternative, I was brought along. I didn't mind all that much, as I liked the opportunity for exploration and discovery. Some of the houses I gladly explored with a sense of awe and wonder. The city I grew up in, located square in the Rust Belt, had been caught in the steel mill collapse of the 1970s. Many people woke up, got dressed, drove to work, and discovered that they no longer had a job. As such, even the nicest parts of the city became abandoned shells of what they once were. Families fled elsewhere in desperation, leaving behind the neighborhoods and home they spent their entire lives in. As a result, there were some very old, but certainly beautiful homes waiting to be sold for the right price, and of course for my mom to collect the commission for. Looking back on what happened that day, I would like to think that in our present day and age, something like this simply could not happen. But this was the mid-80s, and back then, everything was, if I had to hazard a guess, a little less strict on standards and policy. One year during the autumn, when I was 7, my mom dragged me along to an open house that she was overseeing in the historical district of the city. While I never had an eye for home decor, feng shui, or anything in between, I still remember the house's monstrous appearance compared to my small stature. It was 3 stories tall and looked down on me with a foreboding gaze. It had a faded and thinning layer of yellow paint running across it, while the window paneling was an evergreen hue. The roof had a number of light cracks running across it, and the yard itself was barren, except for a few old trees. While I knew that some homes had 2 stories, I had no conception of houses with a 3rd. Sure, a skyscraper could have a 3rd, 4th, or even 17th floor, but not a house. I remember asking my mom as we walked up, and her telling me that lots of older homes had 3 floors. I knew that I would need to see it for myself. As my mom toured the prospective buyers, I wandered around in amazement of the sweeping giant structure. Most of the rooms weren't furnished, adding to the house's illusion of size. It had the makings of a home with a vast, hidden history, with a large cellar and an ancient furnace, The candlelit lamps had been refitted with light bulbs, and the chandelier-guarded foyer with the winding staircase to the second floor all seemed to indicate that the home had been frozen in time. Of course, knowing that a third floor existed, I became determined to discover it. I moved through the second floor hall, opening door after door, but found no stairs. I was certain I had checked every possible location for a flight of stairs in the hallway, short of the small closet door at the beginning of the hall. The door was quite tiny in comparison to the others, so much so that in my initial exploration, my brain did not register the idea that a flight of stairs could be concealed behind it. With no other place to look, I slowly opened the closet door, and as you might have guessed, I found a very cramped flight of stairs concealed behind it. They arced leftward behind the door, and as I peeked my head around, I remember seeing the seemingly dangerous intent of the doorway at the top of the stairs, looking down on me, nearly begging me to enter and discover what mysteries lied beyond. Like most kids, I was willing to persevere up the long climb of stairs simply to satisfy my curiosity. As I arrived at the top, though, it became obvious that it was nothing more than a glorified attic. The floor was wooden, and cobwebs coated the corners, as did spiders on the walls. As I stepped forward, a small cloud of dust formed around my feet. The room was empty save for a single light fixture on the wall, and a window overlooking the yard and the street. There was a small closet, with a door no larger than the one that led up the steps. Though this door seemed far older than any in the house, the wood appeared to be nearly rotten. I attempted to open it, but it was locked. For those unaware, old homes often use old skeleton keys for doors like this. While my mom may have had one, I certainly did not. After a few half-hearted attempts to brute force my way through, I turned my attention to my original goal of seeing the view of the nearby window. I peered slowly out of the window, looking down onto the road below. No matter how high up I've been since, whether it was on a skyscraper or otherwise, nothing will seem as high as when I looked out that window. If you would have asked me then, I very well might have said that I was in outer space, looking across the top of building after building that spread across the neighborhood. I stood there for a good 5 or 6 minutes, dumbfounded in awe of the view beneath me. I don't know the exact order of what happened next. Sometimes I seem to remember turning and looking at the door, and then the shaking and yelling. Other times I was looking out the window when I heard it. Either way, it shook me enough that my memories of it remain unclear. The closet door began to shake, and a voice almost immediately followed. I turned my attention to it immediately. It was a male voice. Not very deep, but certainly an adult.
Hello? Hello? Is anyone there? Please help me. I'm trapped. Somebody please, let me out.
I stood there for a moment, listening to the muffled words I was hearing, trying to process what was occurring, while our natural urge, as adults, would be to immediately react. As a kid, I was more confused, and to be honest, a bit frightened. There was a stranger behind the door after all. Eventually, I mustered out a pretty meager response. In my defense, I think I hadn't quite developed the proper protocol for reacting to someone being trapped in a closet.
Hello? Hey, mister. I'm out here.
He quickly, almost immediately responded.
Oh, thank goodness. Can you unlock this door? I managed to lock myself in. Silly me. Let me out, please.
Obediently, I walked over and began to pull on the doorknob. Like earlier, nothing happened. It was sealed pretty tight, certainly tight enough that a kid my size lacked the strength for. The man kept crying out, each more intense than the last.
Pull! Please help me. Don't you want to help me out of here? Don't you want to let me out?
I could feel the man's breath through the keyhole on the door. My child brain was caught between two competing urges, to help someone in need and to not talk to a stranger. The man did not take kindly to that.
I said now. I want out now.
I don't want to be in here anymore. I'm tired of being in here. Here, of all places.
Something had changed. His voice intensified. There may still have been fear there, but I could now hear aggression in his deepening voice. Unsure, but still wanting to help, I once again tried to pull on the door. Try as I might, but it refused to budge. Even though I was just a child, I could still detect that something was off about the situation. I no longer heard the voice of a frightened soul. Instead, I heard the ominous commands of a caged rat shrieking for freedom.
Let me out, please. I want to escape this cage. Get me out. Away. Help me escape. You want me to escape, right? I want to be out in the world, where the kids run free. Kids like you.
Feeling more uncertain than ever that opening this door was the correct course of action, the man's pleas turned into demands. Any sense of helplessness in his voice had disappeared, leaving only a sinister tone of domination and a hint of insanity.
Get me out of here, you little shit. I'm stuck. I'm sick of being in here.
I've been in here a long time. A long time. And I want out. Nothing wrong with that, you know. Nothing wrong with that.
I didn't appreciate the swear. In my youngster logic, I thought my mom would get angry at me if somebody around me said a bad word. Just as soon as I stopped again in concern, the door began shaking with a violent rhythm, followed by a loud thud. It went on over and over again. So did the man's voice.
Why have you stopped? Don't you want me to be out, little boy? I want to show you my home, my house, my humble abode. Nothing wrong with that. You certainly want to see, don't you? Don't you?
Don't you?
Come in. Come
in.
I was frozen for a moment. Why? I thought. Why would this man want me now to come in? Moreover, it puzzled me as to why he hadn't cried for help the first 5 or 6 minutes of me being in the room. A sensation of fear overcame me, and it became clear that I needed to leave. I then suddenly looked down. To my shock, I noticed, at the bottom edge of my eyes, something moving between the gap between the floor and the closet door. 4 little gray masses inched their way forward, followed by a 5th. A hand that inched towards me, coming within a centimeter of my shoe. I looked down at the now protruding arm. It was unlike any arm that I've seen. Parts of it were deep and dark, and as I look back on it now, some parts were rotten. I was frozen in fear, unable to react, and completely unable to process my surroundings. The index finger rose up and touched my shoe, before I suddenly heard another voice from downstairs. "Honey? Are you up there?" Relieved to hear the sound of my mom's voice, I quickly darted back down the steps, and the sound of violent yelling echoed down the stairs. I grabbed a hold of her legs. "What's wrong?" Nearly crying, I told her that there was a man trapped in the closet, and he wanted to escape. I told her that he was nasty, and he should not be let out. She laughed. "Oh, really? Well, I'll have to go look for myself." She proceeded up the small staircase, I think more to quell my own worries than out of any pressing concern. As she proceeded, undaunted, up the steps, I fearfully found another room that a prospective buyer was looking at, and, feeling a bit unnerved, I stood idly by him underneath his puzzled gaze. Only moments had passed when we both heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the 3rd floor. It was my mother's. The buyer accordingly darted towards the screams. They were eventually accompanied by his own. What followed is a bit of a blur. My mom promptly came down the steps, grabbed me, and we darted out to the front lawn. The buyer ran to a neighbor's house, frantically pounding on the door, demanding to use a phone. Soon, there was a sea of police in the house, and out in the yard was a sea of neighbors and onlookers. I remember being asked a lot of questions about the upstairs room. I told them my story, about the man that asked me to help him out, but I know the officers kindly laughed most of it off. It wasn't for another decade that I was told what happened when my mom went into that room and saw something sticking out from underneath the closet door. Finally, she managed to budge it open, and out fell the stinking, rotting corpse of an unidentified man. My mom said it was almost as if the man had died kneeling against the closet door. The police identified him as an older man, probably in his late 60s or early 70s, and were absolutely flabbergasted as to how this could have happened without being detected. I've thought it through a few times myself. Your guess is as good as mine. My mom has mentioned that the house was a bank foreclosure. Either the bank did a terrible job of inspecting the house, or somebody broke in and dumped the corpse. Either way, from what I heard, it was very obvious that the man hadn't died recently. The police did tell my mom that they were planning on contacting the previous owners. She didn't know what happened after that. A few times I've looked through some backlogs of local papers and have even done a few web searches, but it seems the story ends there. Over the years since then, I've thought long and hard about what happened that day. I know that memories aren't always what you think they are. I know that kids see the world in a different light. Still, the image of the hand creeping underneath the door, inviting me past the veil to see whatever lied beyond, hasn't spared me even a day of passing through my mind. I still manage to sleep at night because I've told myself that it was my overactive imagination, that my 7-year-old brain saw something, perhaps the fingers of the corpse sticking out underneath the door, and formed some sort of narrative around it. I liked stories, and perhaps not knowing the gravity of the situation, my young self spun a yarn for the police officers. Maybe my imagination ran rampant, and the various images of the fiction that I created put images in my head that terrified me so greatly that I convinced myself that it was a reality. You see, that's what kids do. They see the world in a different light, and they tell silly lies born from their imaginations. They simply do not know the meaning or the consequences of their action. Even in that hopeful fiction, I've often wondered what lied beyond the door that day. As I sit here writing this in my bedroom, now in my late 30s, I look to my closet. The door is closed, and it's windy out tonight. I know there are only clothes in there, and I've been in that closet thousands of times, but I can still picture those fingers. I can still hear the pounding, and the near crackling voice begging to be set free. They may have found the body, but did they truly find what I saw that day? Perhaps it's only a memory planted in the imagination of a child, but if I push that memory to its natural edge, deeper than any thought should ever go, into the recesses between fiction and terror, I swear I could have seen a glowing red eye staring back at me through the keyhole. Growing up, I had an awesome childhood. My dad was a contractor who worked long hours to provide for our family, while my mom was a part-time bank teller, but she got off just in time every day to pick me up from school. I saw my dad very rarely on weekdays, as I was put to bed before he got home. Oftentimes we had daddy-daughter weekends, because my mom was worried that we weren't bonding. I mean, we were all close. I just was a lot closer to my mom for obvious reasons. We lived in a very beautiful 2-story home. It looked a lot like one of those houses you would see in home and gardening magazines. We had a giant backyard, with an oak tree equipped with a tire swing. And when I was 8, my dad built me a treehouse up there for me. My mom had enough toys and clothes in it to please an entire litter of kids, but I was an only child, so my mother spoiled me to death. I could have anything I wanted if I put up enough pout. Life was great. The only thing I could never get my mother to budge on was letting me watch TV. I was never allowed to watch it, supervised or not. I felt it was pretty unfair to keep one in the house, especially one of those big ones with surround sound. I tried everything I could to watch cartoons on it, but they had those parental controls that required a password. It was a pretty routine fight in my household. I would beg her for around an hour, at which point she would get fed up and start yelling. I would cry and scream with a force I don't think I could replicate today. As a special treat on Christmas or my birthday, she would pop in an old VHS tape for the whole family to watch, but that was the extent of it. It kind of sucked in school, because all the other kids would talk about their favorite cartoon character, and the only ones that I knew were all old. They would make fun of me for being so behind the times, and I can still hear their laughter piercing my ears. But I was very active in sports and school plays, so I still had a lot of friends. It wasn't really all that bad, I guess. One day I was at school. I must have been around 10 because I remember I was in Miss Fitzgerald's class when I got the call to go to the principal's office. All the shits in my class began the "Ooh, Maggie's in trouble" bit, which I didn't appreciate because I was definitely a goody-goody. The whole walk there, my heart was pounding in my chest. What did I do? I kept thinking to myself. When I got there, the principal just told me my mom was going to work late because one of the girls at her office had gotten sick and wasn't in. I was told that my friend Bentley's mother would come pick me up from school and drop me off at home. As I was turning to leave, the principal stopped me and said, "Oh, and Maggie, be sure to call your mother once you're home safe." When I got home, my dog Roscoe was rowdy, so I let him into the backyard. I walked to the kitchen phone. I picked up the receiver and dialed my mom's work number. I put it up to my ear and heard nothing. I checked the phone, and whatever genius used it last forgot to put the receiver back on the charger, so it was dead. I went to the living room and found that phone, which was luckily charged. I dialed the number and was greeted by Greta, a nice older lady who worked with my mom. She passed me through to my mom, who told me to have a snack and to do my homework, and before I knew it, she would be home. I hung up with her and put the phone back on the charger. That was when I noticed a blinking red dot, indicating messages. I was worried about my soccer game the next evening. They kept saying that it was going to rain, and that they would be keeping us updated on whether or not they were going to cancel it. So I pressed play and walked to the door to grab my backpack. "Hey honey, it's Rick. Sorry I didn't get the chance to see you this morning before you left for work. I wanted to see if you knew anyone who could watch Maggie this weekend. I got us tickets to that violinist you wanted to see. Anyways, I love you. I'll see you tonight. Bye." The next message began to play, as I had just started working on my math homework. "Hey, it's me again. I forgot to mention in my last message that I changed the password this morning. It said it expired when I turned it on this morning. The new one is 90537. Love you." Like I said, I had already pulled out my homework and was working on it, so it took me a moment to register what he said. But when it did, boy, I jumped up like it was Christmas morning. I quickly formulated a plan. I replaced the message so my mom and dad had no clue that I listened to it. I did my homework so my mom didn't think I was disobeying her. I rushed all through my homework and ran to let Roscoe in. I figured he could hear if Mom came home and alert me. I grabbed a pillow off the couch and plopped down on the floor in front of the TV. "Oh yeah, time for some cartoons," I said as I turned on the TV. It popped up with a message, "Password required." I carefully entered the 5-digit passcode. I felt a rush of excitement throughout my whole body. Like I said, I was a good kid, so this was totally out of my nature. I don't know what show was on, but I think it was probably left on the channel my parents watched last night. They were into a lot of those police shows where they go after bad guys who kill or hurt people. I knew this because a lot of the time at night, I could hear the TV in my room, and I could hear a lot of the loud screaming. When I asked my mom about it, she told me about those shows like Law and Order and stuff. I messed around with the remote for a little while, clicking up and down the channels, but each channel was the same. It even had the same white logo on the bottom right-hand side. just with a different actress. They were each shackled up by their wrists to a concrete wall in a dimly lit room. Each of them were dirty with torn clothes and unkempt hair. What I assumed was blood, or probably ketchup, was caked on where the fake cuts covered their skin. I threw the remote across the room. I was so frustrated. Where were the cartoons? The girl on the TV began to cry. I could hear a static. She looked up directly into the camera, with tears flooding her eyes. "Please, you have to let me go." It was like she was talking directly to the viewers at home. "Please, I won't tell anyone. Please." Roscoe had started whining and circling in front of the TV. "Shut up, you goof," I said, rubbing his big head. He rested next to me, but the more the girl on the TV cried, the more he did as well. I kept watching, waiting for the police to come rescue her, but nothing happened. The girl continued to cry and plead, but nothing really changed. I watched until I heard my mom open the garage door. I quickly flipped off the television and put the remote back in its rightful place. The rest of the night was normal. Mom made dinner, I took a shower, and went to bed before my dad came home. I was drifting into sleep that night when it hit me. I knew the girl on the TV. I knew a celebrity. I remember meeting her at a park with my dad on one of our daddy-daughter outings. She had a puppy who looked just like Roscoe, and my dad urged me to go over and introduce myself to her so I could pet the dog. So, of course, I did. My dad and the lady talked for a while I played with the dog. The next day, my dad brought me home Roscoe and gave him to me. "Now you have your very own doggy just like that nice lady yesterday," he said, kissing my forehead. I was so happy for her that she became a big star. She was such a good actress. But boy, I couldn't wait to go to school and tell my friends that I knew a celebrity off of the show Closed Circuit Television. Finally, I had the upper hand.
There's always a reason to be afraid.